You can show an individual pictures of people with hearing aids and other people without hearing aids. And if you ask the person looking at those pictures, who are the more intelligent people? They will say the person without the hearing aid. Now, having a hearing loss has nothing to do with your intelligence, and yet that's still the public perception, which is so unfortunate because we don't have that stigma with glasses. People wear glasses. No one thinks of them as being less intelligent. In fact, interesting, many people think of somebody with glasses as being more intelligent. Hearing impairment can oftentimes affect a person on their job. Many people with a hearing loss don't want to admit to their employers that they're having difficulty hearing because they're afraid that they may not get hired for that job. There are people who have hearing loss that can become very paranoid because they think people are talking about them and they don't hear them properly. A person who has a hearing loss can become very introverted because they're afraid to go to parties. They're afraid to go out in public because they don't want to make fools of themselves. They don't want to answer a question in an inappropriate manner because they only heard part of the question. And so as a result, they withdraw and they don't communicate. They don't take part in those kinds of conversations. In fact, an interesting statistic is that once an individual realizes they have a hearing loss, they wait for an average of 7 years before finally going to look into the possibility of getting hearing aids. One of the most common causes of hearing loss is noise exposure. People who work in noisy environments, who don't wear ear protection, for example, very commonly get high-frequency or high-pitch hearing loss. People can get hearing loss simply from the normal aging process, but it can also occur from one single incident, from a gunshot, from a fire, standing around fireworks. There's also a number of viruses and bacteria that can infect the inner ear. For example, meningitis, mumps, measles. Our ears are simply an ornament to help collect that sound, funnel it into our ear canal, where the sound hits a little membrane at the end of our ear canal that's called an eardrum. Connected to that eardrum are 3 small bones, actually the 3 smallest bones in the body. Those 3 bones, when sound hits the eardrum, vibrate, and at the end of the 3rd bone, that 3rd bone operates kind of like a piston in an automobile, and that piston moves in and out of another membrane that is connected to an organ that's called the inner ear. It's called the organ of Corti. And the inner ear is a little labyrinth type of an organ that is filled with thousands of little nerve cells that are called hair cells. We call them hair cells because under a microscope they look like hairs. They're not really hairs. Surrounding these hair cells is fluid. And the fluid, as the 3rd bone moves in and out of the inner ear, this fluid is compressed. As it's compressed, the hair cells move up and down, and as these hair cells bend, an electrical signal is sent from the ear up to the brain. And it's in the brain that we interpret what that sound is. Of these 30,000 nerve cells or hair cells that you have in your inner ear, each one has a different function. Some of the hair cells that are located furthest out, or the closest to the outside of your ear, are responsible for processing high-pitched sounds or consonant sounds. Well, they happen to be the most vulnerable. A disorder in the inner ear is called a nerve damage or a sensory neural hearing loss. So a person who has this type of nerve damage oftentimes will say, I can hear, but I can't understand what's being said. Basically, what they're hearing is very muffled speech. They can hear the voice, they know someone is talking to them, but they can't differentiate amongst the words or amongst the sounds. The word fit sounds exactly the same as the word sit, because those two, the F and the S, are high frequencies, and the hair cells that have been damaged within their inner ear can no longer differentiate between these two sounds. This is permanent damage to the physical properties of the ear. What I want all of my patients to understand and to expect is this, that in quiet, with hearing aids on, they should hear better than they hear without hearing aids. In noise, in a minimum amount of noise or a moderate amount of noise, they should hear better with their hearing aids on than they do without their hearing aids. However, they should not expect to hear as well in noise, even with their hearing aids, as they do in quiet. And in a very, very noisy environment, at a cocktail party, at a disco, at a concert, what their expectation should be is this. They should hear no worse with their hearing aids on than they hear with them off. We also want the individual to understand when they first get hearing aids that their own voice will sound different to them. Your own voice sounds different because you're plugging your ears. Even without hearing aids, if you plug one ear and you speak, you'll notice that your voice actually moves over to the ear that was plugged. What happens when we speak is that sound gets trapped in the ear canal, and so it makes our voice sound very different. Back in the old times, in the early days, people made all kinds of efforts to hide the use of hearing aids, just as now many people are concerned about the stigma of being seen wearing hearing aids. Back in the 1200s and 1300s, 1400s, the kings would have hearing aids built into their chairs, and they would have, for example, ear trumpets that would come out of the corner of their chairs that would direct the sound into their ears. People would have hearing aids that were actually hidden by long beards that would amplify sound. So hearing aids over the years have really come a long way, and the process by which the sound comes through them has remained somewhat consistent, but now with advances as we learn more about how the human ear works and advances in electronics, hearing aid now can be utilized in what we call digital form.